Okay, I'd like to call to order the regular Board of Directors meeting on July 5th, 2022 for the Marin Municipal Water District. Need a roll call, please.
Director Kohler,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
Director Bragman, Director Bragman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
and President Russell.
Here. Okay, I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda. Second.
Any public comment on the agenda?
We have no hands raised at this time.
Okay. I need a roll call or a vote, or whatever you call that. Roll call, I guess.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Any public comment on items not on the agenda?
We have one hand raised. Mr. Krajewski.
Hi, thank you. Once again, I'm commenting on the same subject because it doesn't seem to want to go away. Namely, back in April, Director Kohler vigorously proclaimed that the water district has never rationed water since she's been on the board. As the board members have heard on multiple occasions, I requested the definition of rationing that Director Kohler was using and a source for that definition. I've not received a response from her to my emails or my comments at board meetings. I've requested similar information from General Manager Horenstein. I did receive a response last week, and we had a cordial and, dare I say, rational email exchange about the term rationing. What purpose is served by a director refusing to clarify a public statement that insisted that the water district has never rationed water during her many years on the board? I have no idea. But having some career experience with communication issues, I see nothing positive for the district when a director chooses to be unresponsive to a customer who asks for clarification of a public statement. This whole issue could have been retired weeks ago if I had simply been given an explanation of Director Kohler's use of the term rationing and a citation for the source of the term. Instead, it drags on and on at the beginning of multiple board meetings. I don't think that's helpful to the image of the board, which at this point is receiving a fair amount of criticism for other reasons. An election of directors is coming up. Perhaps candidates should be asked what they think of this situation and how they would respond if asked to clarify a statement that they made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then next we have 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I hope that the board members and staff read or will read the very enlightening article in last Friday, July 1st, San Francisco Chronicle, section C, page C1, regarding the Peninsula Open Space Agency's decision to keep excluding e-bikes from its dirt trails. I'll briefly highlight just three aspects of the article. Number one, according to the article, the agency generated a comprehensive report covering all aspects of the issue, and I hope that the staff acquires a copy of that article, that report, and reads it and circulates it also to interested board members. Number two, the article says the agency's decision focused on the agency's mission as a conservation open space agency rather than being a recreation agency. And I think that distinction is relevant also to Marin Muni Water District, which also has a primary mission, which is not recreation. And number three, according to the article, the agency heard a presentation from Mr. Boss, Tom Boss, who you hear from also, the bicycle advocate, and he said that if the agency refused to allow e-bikes, then they would come over here. Well, the agency did not allow e-bikes, and that seems to suggest that Mr. Boss recognizes that if we allow bikes, then we will have the South Bay techies over here who would otherwise be over in the South Bay. So please please get copies of that article and read it and think about how it can relate to Marin Muni Water District's future e-bike policies and recreation policies generally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we have Phil Sauter. Mr. Sauter.
Good evening. I sure won't presume to speak for Director Kohler, but I wanted to respond to Mr. Krajewski's question. I look at rationing as something that somebody does to you. And I look at conservation as something that we do ourselves when we get together and decide how we're going to proceed as a water district, as a group of customers, what we're going to do. So that's just my throwaway line. But what I'd like to say in my 3 minutes, today I spent some time with the district's website pages on water usage, starting with a table that shows 20,000 acre feet of water used annually. That's 18 million gallons a day, or 94 gallons per capita system-wide. Together, single and multifamily customers use 13.5 million gallons a day, or 71 gallons per capita. Single-family customers use 10.8 million gallons a day, 6.3 million gallons of which is indoor use and 4.5 million is outdoor use. Multifamily customers use 2.7 million gallons a day, of which 2.5 million gallons is indoors and 200,000 is outdoors. Of the total residential outdoor use, it's just about the same 5 million gallons that we're looking to get from desal. I'm curious as to where this outdoor usage is concentrated. Is it among a small number of total customers? If so, does it make sense for all customers to pay for treated water to be used outdoors by a relatively few customers? I really would like that data. On the same page is a statewide chart that shows we used 157 gallons system-wide per capita per day in 2001, 130 gallons in 2020, and 101 gallons in 2021. Have we conserved 36% in 20 years, including 22% since last year? How did we do it, and can we keep on doing it? There's another chart that shows residential per capita water use at 34 gallons per day in Q3 last year and 31 gallons per day in Q4. This is a fraction of the usage suggested by other data. Why the big difference? Are these flume users? There's a table that shows Marin residents averaging 56 gallons per capita per month in 2022. That's down 23% from last year. Again, that's a lot less usage than shown by other district data. Why the difference? Are we already meeting our conservation goals? And there's a final map that shows March use at 85 gallons per capita per day, down 18% from 104 gallons in March 2013. Again, this data is inconsistent with other data in this section, which is designed to educate customers. What are folks?
Thank you, Mr. Sauter. And next is Barbara Rothkrug.
Hi, I just tuned in, so I don't know if this is the time to talk about the issue of fire prevention, or are we going to talk about that later? Page 40 of this.
This is for comments not on the agenda at this point.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
We have no additional speakers.
Okay, cool. Thank you all for your comments. Director's announcements, general manager's announcements. Ben?
I do have a brief announcement, President Russell. I wanted to share with the board that as of the end of the fiscal year, which is through the end of June, we were able to obtain 8,902 acre feet from Sonoma Water, which turns out to be the highest we've ever taken in a fiscal year or a calendar year. And having done that certainly has benefited us in terms of our position during the water shortage we went through in the current ongoing drought. And, we were able to do that certainly first and foremost with the upgrade to Castania that the board directed staff to do, as well as working closely with North Marin and Sonoma Water. And really for me, a call out to staff, both the engineering staff that helped work the agreements to make this happen in the upgrade, and O&M staff and operations that really day to day really operated the system in a non-traditional way to maximize that water. And it's certainly very timely because now, as you'll hear from Paul, we're now into a period of reduced availability of water from Sonoma. So it really did position us very well this time of year. And I wanted to share that with the board.
Thanks. Cynthia?
Nothing for me.
Thank you. Jack?
I wasn't planning to make a comment, but I'm going to tag on to Ben's comment. Congratulations to our staff. I thought Costanza was a very big deal when we did it, and I think I said so. I continue to think that proudly. We are way over budget in the amount of money we're spending buying water, but that every drop of that water we're buying is being saved water that we're not using from our own reservoirs. So it's a very good move.
Larry?
Yeah, just I wanted to share with the staff that I was at a meter reading at the Fairfax San Anselmo Children's Center last week, which went very well. We staff, Alicia Irish, Craig from the meter department, did a great turnout. We had a lot of staff there to check 3 separate hydrants that serves the Children's Center. And our public hydrant, I'm happy to say, tested right on the money as predicted in our program. So I'm told actually now Ross Valley Fire really uses our predictive program to sort of map their fire response so they know which hydrant to use. But our hydrant on Porteous and Myrna did very, very well. And also working with staff to improve the fire flow at the Children's Center. And I'm hoping we can make that improvement in the next few months, I would expect. So very grateful to the response and to the professionalism really that was shown by staff. So it was a really good day, I thought. And I just want to thank them. So.
I don't know if I would use the word predictive on that. It's actually calculated.
Yeah.
So it's a little different.
Yeah,
than,
absolutely. Absolutely. But it was right on the money. The pressure, everything was right on the money. So it was good.
Monty?
Nope, nothing to add today.
Okay, well, I have a little comment. Ben and I went to Washington, D.C. last week. We were very well received. We had meetings with the Bureau of Reclamation. By the way, my last question to them was, what are you going to do about the Colorado River? They didn't have an answer, or weren't willing to give an answer anyway. And then we met with EPA. There was more people in the EPA meeting than I think exist in EPA. We had a half a dozen people from San Francisco and a half a dozen people from Washington, D.C., the head of the WIFIA program and the head of a variety of their loan programs were there. They welcomed us with open arms. They suggested we set up a master agreement with them so that we can have as much of a shot at getting more money in a loan basis as possible. They all said hi to Cynthia, by the way, so I passed that on. I'm sorry I have their names, but I don't have them in front of me. I'll send you their cards. I'm sure you know them all.
I do. I know them all very well. Thank you. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, it did. And Matt did a great job too. He had greased the skids for us. It went a lickety split. And our last meeting on Friday was with Jared Huffman and his staff. And they've informed us that they've earmarked a substantial amount of money in the bipartisan infrastructure bill for us. So There's good news coming down the road here, it looks like. Of course, it has to get through the next phases of becoming law, but it's getting there. So better to be where we are than where others are. So it was a great meeting, very effective. And we were there with our lobbyist, our DC lobbyist, Ben Miller, who used to be Jared's head of staff. He, needless to say, had a welcoming arm for us in Jared's office. Jared, actually, there was several congressmen that we were trying to talk to. They all got hung up in the gun control vote, which went late. And then Jared was leaving his office for Lisbon to go to the meeting on the oceans in Lisbon. So we had a little window with Jared, but a long window with his staff. So anyway, that's what we did last week. It was a well-received trip.
That's great.
So-
I'm glad it went so well. That's fantastic that you were there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved?
Roll call.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Okay, we're now on the regular calendar, watershed wildfire incident review.
Yeah, good afternoon, Director Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. I'm going to present this item to you tonight with our Chief Ranger, Don Wick. I'm going to pull up our presentation here for you. All right. So this is a good exercise for all of us to do after we have an incident on the watershed. And so we're going to present a number of facts and pieces of information around the district's operations and how the response went for the recent lake fire, as well as some other incidents that have occurred on the watershed in the last year. So we'll provide an overview of our current capabilities in terms of equipment, staffing, then review the wildfire incidents that occurred, and then our response, lessons learned, and then discuss some potential enhancements that have been recommended by staff that they're thinking. So in terms of what capabilities the district currently has, the district's really positioned for initial attack and to support watershed operations in that way. We have a number of pieces of equipment on the watershed that support our rangers' activities. We have our field rangers are operating type 6 and type 7 ranger trucks. The top left-hand corner there in the picture is a type 7 truck that we utilize. The benefit to these types of trucks and the amount of water that they bring to the scene is very agile. They're capable of navigating our fire roads in an efficient manner. And they're really designed for initial attack, because the vast majority of the time our rangers are not responding to wildfires, but they're responding to other incidents on the watershed. So that's a very fitting type of vehicle for them to be utilizing on a daily basis. Now, the district also has other equipment that we've reviewed with the board and community before. We have a type 1 tactical water tender, which is the top right photo that carries just over 2,000 gallons of water, and it's a 4-wheel drive vehicle. That's a tremendous asset to the county. It responds to a number of county incidents in remote locations and is a key piece of infrastructure or equipment that we have. We also have a type 3 wildland fire engine that holds 500 gallons of water. Both of those pieces of equipment are to be driven by 2 people at a time. So that really is a key piece of how we respond. They require more capacity than our field rangers trucks do. And then we also have both the portable pumps that we utilize when we have fires in remote locations. We have a fire rated dozer, and then we have about 5,000 feet of wildland fire hose. And this positions us really to be the first on scene and to take that initial stance and then wait for the response from County Fire, who really has the responsibility to support us and has a tremendous fleet of vehicles as well as staff to carry out the actual fire response operations. So in terms of staffing, we've reviewed this before. Rangers, we currently have 6 full-time rangers. We're currently recruiting for 1 additional ranger. We have 1 seasonal that covers the entire span of the year. In our watershed maintenance department, we have 7 full-time staff. In our natural resource department, we have 2 full-time staff. All of these staff are trained in wildland firefighting and have a certification 2 or higher This is kind of consistent with what we've had in past years. We have had more rangers at times, and as the district evolved and started to move towards a more proactive land management approach, we've kind of shifted the staffing to support those activities, and we'll review a bit more of that in the next slide. And then in addition, we have one contract sheriff who's not a wildland firefighter, but does support emergency response operations. That was a more proactive approach to managing our watershed and creating a more resilient landscape. We're conducting vegetation and fuel reduction work and forest restoration efforts under our Biodiversity Fires and Fuels Integrated Plan, which was adopted in 2019. The map to the right shows you all the areas that have been completed to date and the areas that we're planning to go in the future. And then the bullets are just summarizing what we've completed this fiscal year. So we're completing about 1,200 acres of vegetation management work on an annual basis. That's running us around $3.5 million. Some of that's coming from local funds, others from grants. And the one thing I'll point out is that in the current fire, which was adjacent to Bontempe Lake, we actually had 2 years of treatments that had occurred around this area. So in 2020, we had treated this along Bontempe Road, Dam Road, there's a meadow where we had done fuel reduction treatments. And then all these 2 knobs, we in 2021 completed forestry restoration work to address hazardous fuels that had built up over time in that location. And that was key in terms of the wind directions were going towards the lake during the fire that happened on Bontempe, but had they been going the other direction, they would have burned into a forested area that had been previously treated, which would have significantly reduced and adjusted the behavior of that fire, as we reviewed at the last watershed committee in terms of our wildfire modeling work of our post-project success. So now our rangers are kind of boots on the ground, as you would think, and up in the tops of the mountains, we have wildfire cameras that help us get a perspective of the watershed and other areas throughout the county. This is a critical asset to the community. There's a website called alertwildfire.org that you can sign up for. You can get alerts when cameras in your area notice smoke, and you can actually zoom into those areas to really see the location of those fires. And this is how some of our staff were able to respond from other field locations and understand the location. There's also traffic over the radio once it's been reported that guides them to the location of the response. But this is a really key and critical piece of infrastructure within the county supporting operations generally. Now, in addition to that, there is the county fire lookout, and there's 2 of them. Marin County Fire manages the lookout. It is staffed by volunteers. It's a 24-hour shift, and it runs from a season of May through October. When it's in service, there's a 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. kind of general timeline that the volunteer is signed up to be operating under. There's a required minimum training for this program and annual shifts that each member should carry out. Now, currently they do have a wait list for new volunteers, so they're pretty much at capacity according to Marin County Fire. And they see this as a great asset to the community, but really the advancements in our wildfire alert programming camera network is critical for that early first response notification to the fire departments. However, the lookouts are critical and key and a great asset for the community to continue to support. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Don Wick, who's going to talk us through the response, and specifically we'll start with the lake fire response. So Don, you want to take it away?
Sure. Good afternoon or good evening, members of the board. So first, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge what a great job our staff did, both the rangers and maintenance, responding to this. They did a phenomenal job working with the responding agencies that were also coming to help us, and together it was very successful. So I just wanted to put that out there and acknowledge them. They did a great job. I was very impressed. So 2 things happened. Ranger Brett Petisich was on Skyhooks Road by Redwood Turns when he was flagged down by a citizen saying there was a fire on the shore of Bontempe. And he couldn't see exactly where it was. The guy said on the Sunnyside Trail. So he actually started driving towards Lagunitas Lake or the picnic grounds a little bit to see if he could see the fire. And simultaneous to that, another citizen actually went to the ranger station and reported it. So we had Brett looking at it, and John Fouché, the maintenance supervisor, radioed Kevin Cook and advised him of the report of the fire, who was out on the Azalea Hill project. He responded back, and he said when he got to the Bullfrog parking area. He could see the column of smoke, so he raced back to the ranger station. Now, once Brett saw the smoke, also saw the column, he headed back to the ranger station too. And so they both met up there. They climbed on our Type 3 fire engine, which is our wildland fire engine, and they headed towards the Redwood Turns area of the Bontempi Lake. Now, also what happened is Brett happened to have a rider that day. He dropped him off at the front gate. And this is kind of key, and it's a lesson that we learned pretty quickly, is he asked the rider to close the incoming gate to block people from coming into the scene because we had an active fire there. And then subsequently, we also put, I think Sean went down there and helped direct the incoming fire trucks from County Fire, Ross Valley Fire, and we got a water tender from Central Marin Fire. All of them responded to this fire. And not a lot of them are familiar with the watershed, so he helped direct them to where they needed to go. So you have, Brett and Kevin, they went to Redwood Turns, which is the east side of the fire. At the same time, Ross Valley Engine 621 arrived. They have 3 crew members on there. So the 5 of them grabbed hand tools and started hiking down the Sunnyside Trail from that side. The other responding units went to the dam side and approached from the west side. So we had the fire canvas on both sides and started to do our initial attack on it. And echoing what Sean said, that area had been worked for fuel reduction, and that truly did help our fire on our cause. If the grass had been higher, even with that small wind, it would have been a much bigger fire for us. So that definitely is showing that is working in our favor. And then we had also, it's an automatic dispatch for CAL FIRE to launch one of their helicopters or air support for any wildland fire in Marin. So we did get one launched from Boggs Mountain up in Lake County. But our initial attack was pretty rapid. And by the time they got down to Novato, they got canceled because we no longer needed them. We had the fire contained, and now we were just going in and continuing to put it out and then trying to move into a mop-up phase. So they did do a flyover, but they weren't needed for the fighting of the actual fire itself. And then, so it took us about 40 minutes from the time where we got on scene to the time, well, actually, from the time we learned about the fire to the time we actually had it under control was about 40 minutes, which is a phenomenal time. And talking to Chief Weber, he said it was probably one of the fastest wildland fires to be contained in the state of California. We were just lucky. It was mid-morning, temperatures weren't all that high. We lucked out because the breeze, we did have a slight breeze, but it was pushing towards the water, which helped us. And then the footpaths around that area actually created a break for us also. So we were able to stop it at the footpaths on both sides of it. So all in all, it was a great exercise for us. Had it happened later in the day, the winds really picked up. That would have been a different animal. In addition to that, I just want to say we put the boat in the water. We have a boat at Sky Oaks with a portable pump on it. We brought it in there and it was able to supply, we have also fire hoses on the boat. So they were able to supply hoses from the boat to the shore to actually fight the fire with that also. And that becomes very useful for us in remote areas. We've used that in other fires off of Alpine Lake in remote areas. It's a huge help. So again, and then the total mop up ended about noon. They, fortunately for us, County Fire had both their hand crew units, which are about 20 personnel each one. They were both in county and they sent them both to it. And so the mop up and the actual fighting of the fire was pretty much a breeze for us. So with that, if you have any questions. And then moving on, the West Peak fire we had last year, that was started by a car that had broken down on the side of the road and actually caught the brush on fire on the downhill side, the south side of the road, and it jumped over to the north side of the road. And I can't remember, that was about an acre, I believe, or maybe a little less than an acre. But again, our fuel reduction work up there, that was huge in containing that one, because we had removed a lot of fuel from that area. And that helped us also. Response to that one was phenomenal too. Throckmorton Fire was up there. Our ranger, Brett Pedicich again, headed up there. And then we brought up our water tender. And the one thing about our water tender, it's probably the only one in the county that can actually climb some of the hills that we're faced with for wildland fires. And it's a huge resource for county fire and the other fire districts when they get into those kinds of areas. Their fire water tenders are not really built to do that, unless it's a pretty easy fire road for them to climb up. Ours will climb up the side of a mountain. It's a great piece of equipment. So that one, they did send an aircraft, airplane and a helicopter to that fire on West Peak. And they did end up dropping retardant on the fire itself to help us knock it down. And then the rest of it was handled by crews on the street. We used our water tender to resupply their water tender, who then drove up to resupply the engines. So it was kind of a little relay there, but that worked out great. And then the one thing that we did run into on that particular fire is water supplies. So we ended up going down to Rock Springs. There's a water tank down there, spring fed, and we pulled water from that, brought it up to the base of West Peak, put it in a one of our catch pools, and then supplied that to their water tender. So if we had more fire hydrants up in that area, it would have been a lot easier, but we don't. But that's just part of our job, is to get water from one place to another. And sometimes you have to use multiple modes to get it there. So that was an interesting thing for that fire. And then, Sean, I'm turning it back over to you for this, or is this mine?
Either way, Don.
Okay. So one of the things that we did learn from the Sky Oaks fire that was a huge learning point for us was to get the gates closed, stop incoming traffic. One thing I'll say is it doesn't stop everybody. We put a sign down at Bolinas Road, a Sky Oaks Road, down at the intersection down there, saying that the watershed would close due to an emergency, and we still had people driving up there. Which our biggest concern, obviously, is you have fire equipment trying to get up there, and now you have citizens trying to drive in the middle of it. We also had bicyclists that just riding right through the middle of it. I don't know the answer to that. It is a problem, and if it was a bigger fire, it would have been a huge problem. The other thing that was I thought was pretty heads up is, I think it was Carl Sanders realized there was a school out at Lagunitas picnic area of young kids. And so we sent a couple of vehicles down there to tell them they had to get out there because we had an emergency. We didn't know what was going to happen with the fire at that time. We didn't want them to get them trapped. So we moved them out. We actually transported some of them in our own van up to Sky Oaks area where the parents came and picked them up. Again, those are things you have to consider when there's a big emergency up there, is how do we deal with the public? And so I thought that was pretty heads up on Carl, and Sabrina, I think, also helped move those kids out of there. So our role is really the initial attack, and we're relying on hand tools and our equipment to do that. As long as we can start fighting the fire and getting it contained in some manner, County Fire, Ross Valley Fire, they're the ones that are going to support us the first off. They're really good at responding. They're really good at working with us. And so we're just trying to hold it until they get there, and then either we support them or we have other roles that we can fill. We can start evacuating, use the rangers in different roles, do traffic control and all that stuff with them. And again, one of the things that we're reviewing now, and Sean can attest to this, we're looking at our water supply on the watershed. Our tanks, we have a number of them. We have like eight spring fed tanks. 2 of them are failing, and we really need to start looking at replacing those. One of them, at least, Poison Springs, is in a very remote location out at Pine Hill. And that one was used for the Pine Hill fire back in 17. So to lose that tank would be not a good thing. So we need to start looking at that stuff, and maybe if we can look at putting hydrants in different areas up there, that would be also help us for firefighting.
Mhm.
So Sean, I pass it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
Mhm.
One of the things that Don does after every fire is he convenes all of the folks who were on the front line and does a debriefing. And when he was doing this debriefing, it was generally understood by all staff that were involved in the response that this was a very seamless response by the water district in terms of their tactical decisions to mobilize the Type 3 engine to get to the scene with the capabilities that they might need. And also a very coordinated response with County Fire in their ability to mobilize the resources to quickly suppress the fire. Now, I think one of the things, right, when we live in a fire adapted ecosystem where fires will be reoccurring on the landscape, we have to become more comfortable with living with fire. While we'll be responding to those and suppressing them, we can be more proactive in our work and on the landscape to help us be more adapt and resilient as a water district. So one of the main things that folks noted about both of those fires that occurred and district was responding to was that our vegetation management was influential in helping to influence the behavior of fire. So the district's been scaling up vegetation management, and as we continue to think about where to strategically go next, we should continue to discuss and think about going larger than we are with some of our management actions, specifically around some of our forest restoration in areas that have been impacted by sudden oak death. Now, one of the other operational elements that the district rangers pointed out was that we do have mobile pumps on our boats, but we could improve the capacity of those by getting stronger pumps that would allow us to pump water further from the lakes. So that is a tremendous asset to be able to mobilize that equipment out to a remote location, and stronger pumps would allow us to pump water up to a mile from the lakes to work and support the suppression activities. So Don mentioned that our water tender is an incredible asset to the community. However, I think we've all probably driven a 20-year-old truck, and if you have driven a 20-year-old truck up a side of a mountain, it maybe isn't the safest and most comfortable equipment to be accessing a fire in. So one of the key pieces of infrastructure that we're thinking about in the future is upgrading that piece of equipment to ensure that our staff responding to these fires in remote locations are in a safe space and have the capabilities they'll need to get in and out of a remote location. So we also appreciate and recognize that some folks might need more information about how to respond to fires. So one of the things we've been considering and thinking about is signage enhancements within our kiosks, really giving information about emergency response, how to evacuate, potentially where cell phone reception is on the watershed and where it isn't, would be a beneficial inclusion of our watershed map. We do also recognize that our spring tanks, those redwood tanks that were put on the landscape at different periods in time, those are an asset. They're not always used, but when they are used, they're critical. We also have fire hydrants on the watershed, but we could have more, and that could be an area that we focus on. Ranger staffing is critical. Seasonal kiosk staffing is helpful, especially when we're trying to close the watershed and keep people updated. There's capacity around funding for all of these things, but those are key pieces of support that would come in handy. And we do appreciate, and I think we've all been on public lands where there's cell phone black spots where you're not getting reception. It's probably not realistic to think that we'll get reception everywhere on the watershed, but our IT department is looking into if there are options for boosters. We kind of more immediately could look at developing a better map that shows people where they can go to get cell phone access, and that would be helpful. There are many ways to get information to the district. Often our rangers are contacted by visitors, letting them know about an incident or an issue, and that information is passed on over the radio and to mobilize more equipment. So those are kind of the takeaways that staff thought about in response to this fire. And that's the completion of the report and review that we have for you this evening, and we'll take any questions that you might have regarding the incidents or our operations of the watershed.
Maybe
Thank you,
I'll
Sean.
jump in and say, I just want to, this was a really thorough, I mean, we've had other fires and this was a really thorough, really helpful review. So thanks, Sean, to you, and Don, to you. Mainly, I also just wanted to really commend the folks who were engaged, particularly in the most recent fire. I mean, What really struck me is that, notwithstanding the challenges that you found, the coordination with all of the other agencies seems pretty seamless. And I just want to really commend you for that. I know those are relationships that the district staff and the Rangers specifically have been building for a long time. So I'd be interested in hearing you talk a little bit about that. I'm hearing you say it went really well. My sense is that a lot of that has to do with the investments that you've made in building those relationships and building those protocols. But I think we're all very grateful for how well it went. And it could have obviously gone another way, but my sense is that preparation, that time put into building those relationships and those protocols has really paid off. Have I got this about right?
Yeah, those relationships are critical to us, and they're also critical to the other agencies too. So where we're located in the unincorporated of Fairfax, County Fire is responsible for that. They're an arm of CAL FIRE by contract, and they oversee Ross Valley now. They actually have I think it's one of their chiefs, assistant chiefs, who oversees Ross Valley Fire. They no longer have their own chief. So they're connected at the hip anyway. So Ross Valley Fire is the closest. We'll probably get them first, and then county rolls in right behind them. But those are relationships that we can't do without either of us, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, congratulations again on not just how this rolled out, but doing that really important prep work over time.
Well, and the other thing that I'm sure you're aware of it, but when the county gets drawn back down, because they are an arm of a contract agency with CAL FIRE, they go out of county a lot on these, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. So they draw down their resources rapidly. And if their dozer goes out, they always request ours because ours is fire rated, and they just need, by a contract, I think, with CAL FIRE to have a dozer available. So they'll take ours and park it at Woodacre Station. Generally, in case there's a fire within the county, they have a resource there. And that's true of our type 3. If they draw down all their type 3 engines, they'll ask for ours so that they can backfill theirs. So that relationship is true for both of us too.
That's great.
Yep.
Maybe I'll just add to that. Just, obviously what has happened and how well everything went is the result of many years of effort by many people. So I think, that kind of coordination and communication and relationship and infrastructure doesn't just happen overnight. So it really does reflect some planning and effort that has been there for quite some time, recognizing the threat that wildfire has for us. One question I have just watching the presentation is just, asking the question, do we have enough supportive infrastructure to really deal with that initial attack? It seems like, really the most important moment in a fire, is our quicker response until support can arrive. And how big of a difference does it really make if we have do we have the sufficient initial response power so that we can have a significant, hand in the fate of how big this fire gets until additional support comes along? And I noticed, that the trucks that responded to the fires, and they were the type 3 and the type 7, the smaller trucks that we have. Is that because they're faster and more nimble, and if and do we have enough of them in the watershed to be able to respond, because our watershed is quite large?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of caveats to that. It depends on where the fire is and how big it is to start with. To answer your question about the type 6, type 7s, so every ranger has the capability of being a first responder with a pump. My truck is the only one that doesn't have it, but the rangers themselves do, and generally they're out in the field. So it's always better to get better pumps, which some of ours are pretty old, but I mean, they're working for right now. We just bought 2 new pumps for 2 that were getting older and starting to fail a little bit. Those pumps are a lot stronger than the ones we had before. The pumps we replaced would put out 10 gallons per minute. These put out 80. And that's quite a difference when you're doing an initial attack. That's the same thing that Sean was talking about for the pump for the boat. Getting a bigger size for that boat will allow us to do a much better initial attack from the boat and to support the people on the shore. So
Great, thank
I
you.
don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does, it does. And just one other question about the tanks that we have in the watershed.
Mhm.
And, I'm wondering whether, a question of whether do we need more tanks in the watershed, water placed where we need it, so that we don't have you were talking about some of the relay that was needed to be done in order to keep trucks full. Should we have more storage in the watershed dispersed so that we don't have a shortage of water if we've got the resources on site to do an initial attack? Do we need more water so that we're not having that be a limiting factor?
My short answer is yeah, we need more up there. We need more areas to go to when there's a critical fire that we can have available to us immediately.
Are we talking about 5,000 gallons, 10,000? Obviously easy.
Yeah, we'd have to look at where we're putting them and how close they are to another tank or another water source.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the ones, Sean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Poison Spring tank, the old wooden one that's starting to fail, is 20,000 gallons, I believe. And now it's only holding about 2,000.
Yeah.
So, we have various sizes up there on the watershed. But if you have a big fire, the more the better.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up with what everybody said, particularly Monty. I think we need to expand our budget on fire prevention up in the watershed. The assets we have are so incredibly valuable as far as the bang for the buck, the amount of protection that a new pump in a truck can provide. It's such a modest investment. I really think, it's kind of heartening to hear staff talk about, upgrading the equipment, because compared to some of our other investments that we're making, it's really minuscule. And for example, I'm wondering if we did replace the water tender, maybe we should think about getting another type 3 so we can cover both sides of the mountain. The comments about getting some hydrants up there, I think, is incredibly a good point. I've always wondered if we could just get some hydrants up there, in critical areas that we could just attach to. That would be an incredible asset if we could figure out a way to pressurize those lines and get hydrants out there. So again, I just think this, in our budget scale, the equipment that we're talking about is really a bargain. And I really think we need to take a hard look at that when we go into our budget hearings in the next couple months. Glad to hear you guys are thinking about improving signage. I think empowering visitors and getting them alert that there actually is fire season that they need to be attentive to, and to give them instructions when they come in, incredibly important to empower our visitors to be extra eyes on the watershed. So great point there. Mapping cell coverage, again, this is something that we talked about the first time that I'm glad you guys are following up on. And then, maybe considering doing some training of some volunteers through our volunteer program. And final point is, I talked to Peter Anderson, who was the one who actually went to the scene and pulled the individual out that was found. And, I just want to repeat his praise for the response of our staff. And, he sent me some incredible photos of maybe 10 staff sort of marching up in a line to attack the fire. And, you know, I'm assuming these are staff. This was not the Mount Tam fire crew. These were our.
To be honest with you, that was probably the TAM crew.
Was it?
heading up
Okay.
there, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it was an impressive turnout of staff, and just to control the fire that way was an incredible good luck. And the other thing, as far as the fire performance, Sean, I mean, were you able to, the thing I'm concerned about is when the sparks get aerosolized or when they're pushed by the wind. I mean, did we see any of that kind of fire type of behavior?
No, for this one, it was mainly in the grasses. The winds were fairly low. It was maintained on the floor. It did go up into the canopy in small locations, but we weren't getting like embers drifting, 500.
Yeah.
And again, I think that it has to do with the fuel load reduction. If the grasses had been higher, I think we would have seen that. And I think that truly was a benefit of having that fuel reduction done.
Yeah. So that's also an incredible lesson, and really reinforces what we're doing, I think.
Yeah.
So I think you're very accurate. And I just want to mention, I think in terms of response, we're always going to have limitations regardless of how much equipment and personnel we have. But when we're actually proactively managing the landscape with the intention of reducing fire behavior, we're having a much greater influence overall across the watershed for whatever situation occurs, and might, impact different areas that are more remote than this particular one. And we need to have that laid down.
And I think it's very insightful to mention how that management helps control fires ahead of time. So I think, prevention is very important.
I'll give you an example of how it benefits us. In my opinion, Sean and I went up with a group last year up to Paduro Meadow, where they had been doing a lot of fuel reduction up there. Mark Brown, who's part of Marin Fire Prevention now, was up on that walk, and he had been one of the deputy chiefs for Marin County Fire prior to moving over to fire prevention. But he looked at what we did up there, and he said it changed his whole outlook on how he would respond to a fire on Mount Tam, because we had reduced so much fuel up there. He wouldn't send in, 2 more platoons than he needed. Before, he would have sent the world there, right? Because it was so loaded with fuel. Now he goes, I'd only send 1 platoon up there.
Wow.
Normally I would have sent 3.
Yeah.
So for him to say that was huge.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear that a strategic viewpoint and that our overall management approach actually is making a difference. So that is very reassuring. No guarantees. We know that. But
I do want to acknowledge Matt Circle. He's the one that does the fire training for the Rangers and the maintenance staff. He does a phenomenal job to keep us on our toes. He really does train us, and it pays off. I mean, as much as we grumble, it paid off.
Yeah.
So he does a great job.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
I have a question about the cameras that I think Sean was talking about for fire detection. Several years ago, at least 2, I saw a presentation by Sonoma Water on a very sophisticated system of cameras they had that they were using for early detection of fires. I came back, I think Krishna was general manager then, and probably Mike Swayze was in your shot, and was told that they're very much invested, that we in MMWD is very much invested in that and looking closely at it and hoping to do that. Are those cameras that you were showing us and talking about earlier similar, or do they do the same thing, and are they as effective?
Yeah, absolutely similar. Same kind of system. That system is broader than just Sonoma and Marin. And if you sign up for that alert, wildfire.org, you'll actually get notified whenever there's a fire throughout California where there's camera networks like this. So it's all very connected, and it is incredibly useful for the communities to be able to see quickly.
Mm-hmm.
a couple of things. It's clear, and congratulations to both Sean and Don, that the real key to this is people and good thinking. The equipment is important, but the real key is to be able to respond quickly with the human brain and to step on the problems. So I'd like to really thank you guys on behalf of the board for the work of your staff and the excellent work of the Rangers, Don, and staying in front of this problem, because it undoubtedly, water supply is important, but fire is much more of an acute issue than our long-term water supply. So we really need to keep an eye on fire. I have an idea, and I'm sure you've already thought of it, but do we need to have a police car respond to those gates where you're having problems with the people accessing?
That's a great question. So typically what we would do in that particular case, if it had been a bigger fire, I would have asked for the sheriff's office to send a car up there and block off Sky Oaks Road.
Okay.
And that's true if there's a fire up beyond us, let's say it's out Bolinas Fairfax Road up past the Meadow Club. That's one of the things that we're really considering doing now is blocking off the incoming gates to any of that to the public and just allowing emergency vehicles. Because the last thing we want to do is have an accident from a citizen getting run over by a fire truck or vice versa. So if we can keep them out of there altogether, it makes emergency personnel's job a lot easier. So we're trying to do that.
Or getting trapped, Don.
We're getting trapped. You're absolutely
You're
right.
thinking you're smarter than the fire, and it
Yeah.
surrounds you. The other thing that hit me while we were talking is, and this obviously only works where the cell phone is working, but it seems to me maybe we should be broadcasting something on the cell phone network, at least a text message.
We can, and that was part of the we put up signs so you could sign up for the county's via which next door alerts while you're on the watershed. And if it was a big event, we would get a hold of OES and ask them to broadcast what's going on and where we need people to go. So that is in place. We just haven't activated it yet.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think, Ben, it would be a good idea to review our SOPs. I think it's better to overreact than underreact. Like just automatically close those entrances, have the cops come and just keep the people out of your hair.
Yeah,
I
agree with you.
because the innate curiosity is always going to be there, and they just want to see what's going on. And the last thing you need is a bunch of looky-loos in the middle of where you need to be.
I have one more question, which was,
Of course.
Sean or Don, I'm not sure, mentioned we don't have hydrants or water above Throckmorton. And I'm just wondering whether, is that an engineering issue? Is that, I mean, can we address that? Is it worth, maybe investing in a tank at higher elevations so that we have better coverage at the higher elevations that can, just cover more of the mountain with either hydrants or supply?
Yeah, it's something we're thinking about, Director Bragman. And there used to be tanks as part of the West Peak military base. So we're investigating how those were filled back in the day. And then there is a tank near Throckmorton. It would take a significant improvement to be able to get water and fire hydrants up on Ridgecrest there, but that would be a significant improvement for response. Because that, in reviewing that incident with the Throckmorton Fire Station, that was kind of one of the worst case scenarios in their mind, was when a fire starts like that and people are at East Peak and you're having to truck all the water up there to actually fight the fire. It was kind of like the exact scenario they've been training for a long time.
So you guys will be doing some kind of an inventory of our assets up there, and
yeah, we've already started. Matt has gone around and identified the tanks that we have up there and the ones that are failing, and the ones that we really need to start looking at replacing in the near future.
Good. I mean, again, it just seems some of these investments, a lot of bang for the buck, a lot of safety for the buck. It's really something I think we can handle, even with the budget as constrained as it is. So good to hear.
Sean, my guess on those tanks at the Air Force Base, or whichever base it was, there's probably a cistern not too far away. That'd be my guess, that they just caught the water. I don't think they pumped it. They just caught it and lifted it into the tank and be done with it.
Yeah,
A lot of cisterns floating around.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody cool?
Yeah.
Could we have public comment?
Yes, we have 2 hands up now. Tom McAfee, Mr. McAfee.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to the board and to everyone for their willingness to take this seriously, because it's a critical problem. And the fact that you agendized this so soon afterwards, we really appreciate it. We appreciate the work of Will Houston to bring it to the public's attention in his IJ article. But unfortunately, I think there were a lot of details that were omitted, and a lot that were actually misleading and were wrong. And I'd like to point out some of those. And the main thing, that said, you guys, the response was terrific, as you have shown. However, the response was great, but the detection and the notification time really needs to be looked at, because we need to get real about what happened here. The timeline got glossed over. You say the smoke was reported at 9:45, but in fact, this was at least 20 minutes after the initial ignition and 15 minutes after Peter Anderson tried to use his cell phone and discovered that he had no service. He couldn't tell anybody. And that period of time, 20 minutes, if you think about it, these conditions were the most benign you could imagine this happening. There were no other fires going on around the state at all. It was cool. The temperatures were in the 60s. The humidity was high. And when they say that there are light winds, no, that's not true. There were no winds. There were no winds there. The only thing that kept it from spreading was the trail. Otherwise, it burnt the only way it could, and that was down to the lake. That was one, but there was no wind there. And as I believe Ranger Wick mentioned, 6 to 8 hours later, there were 40 to 50 mile an hour winds whipping through there. Had this fellow who decided to smoke his joint up there done this in the evening, yes, thank you, I see the minute remaining, thank you. Had he decided to do this later, it would have been a completely different story. So what I'd like to say is this. Sean, you mentioned 100% cell coverage is not realistic. Well, I'm sorry, it has to be realistic. It's critical. That's the only way we're going to get out there. We need to familiarize the fire crews. If you say, oh, they didn't know the way around, the ones that came in from Marin, well, has anyone ever taken them out with rangers and shown them around and gotten them familiar? They have to be familiar. This can't be a learning on the job sort of a situation. The alert wildfire system, has this been tested for efficacy? Are you willing to bet your life on it? Because frankly, Ranger Wick said it was used as a way to confirm what was going on, not to detect it. They depend on human beings to detect. We need to get the consequences for this. Everybody's asking, was the guy cited who started the fire?
If you could just finish your sentence, please.
Could I make one more point that's very important about citing
Yes.
the infraction? I
Do it,
believe
Tom.
it's really important to make sure that anybody that's smoking up there has an immediate and consequential fine, maybe $500 to $100, $1,000, so that people know, you can't do this. And that begs the question of more ranger staffing to enforce it and for surveillance. Yes, you did a great job. We have so much more to do. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you. Larry Minikis, Mr. Minikis.
Good evening, all. I'd like to thank Sean and Don for really an excellent presentation, and Larry Bragman for his comments. I think Director Bragman has said something before about hydrants, more hydrants on the watershed, and it is a good idea. And certainly he and I know I've advocated to the board to upgrade our Class 7 and Class 6 trucks for some time here. They're getting quite up there. And I think that's been clear. But I think what really comes from this, and there's a lot of positive, and I appreciate all the positive remarks that were made, but what really comes from this is to take the last two slides, the lessons learned and the operational enhancements. And I would like to see support for that to come back to the Watershed Committee on September 15th as a report as to an action plan, as to how we can begin to do things better. Where should we go next? How should we take it further? Because this has been an informal conversation. We should do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But I think it needs to be brought together in a report form, presented to the board, presented to the public, and an action plan drawn up so that we do things better and that we become more fire resilient and more prepared as we go through this. We were lucky. We had something similar, almost exactly the same happen here in my hill on San Rafael Hill, right above my house and just a little to the left of us. MWPA had done a lot of work up there. The fire burned right up to it and they just waited for it. It became very easy for them. We've toured it and it's just great that this work is going on. And as the operational enhancements are saying, put more into the BIFIP. You know, it's going to cost money. It's going to take budget. That's the realistic part of this. We're going to have to find a way to fund these things. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Barbara Rothkrug. Ms. Rothkrug.
You need to unmute. There you
Hi, I'm trying to unmute. Am I unmute? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
go. Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I hike a lot on Mount Tam, and most of the areas you've been talking about. Last weekend, I was at that particular area on Bontempi, and I saw the fire scar. And I went up and saw the knoll where I guess that guy was found. And the winds last Saturday were ferocious, just ferocious. I had to wear my winter jacket practically all buttoned up and wished I had a windbreaker besides. It was so cold and windy. And just imagining what could have happened in that kind of wind was really frightening. I'm a big fan of the water district. I voted for Prop C. I really thought that was a good thing to do. And I'd certainly be willing to pay more taxes to get proper coverage in our water district. I would like to see people in the fire tower on top of Tam. I'd like to see that tower manned 24/7. Since fire season has become a year-round thing, I think we need to have that tower manned. And I'd really, and that would be the fastest way to detect where a fire was coming from, where it was located. The fact that it took an hour pretty much for the fire personnel to arrive was really a very long time. It would have been really bad news if the winds had been like the ones I was out in last week. And I think people in the county, if they understood what was going on and what the water district does, would support it. Because the water district doesn't just produce water for us to drink, it also protects the mountain and the sources of our water. And even the land clearing, I think that's really important. And I've seen a lot of clearing of the land, especially I noticed it around Lake Lagunitas, where I saw a lot of trees have been taken out. I think that's important, but you can't clear everything on that mountain. There's tons of brush still around there, and it needs to be cleared. And I think we really need to put more money into it. And I think that people in the county need to know so that they're not always worrying about a 5-cent increase in their rates or something like that. So thanks very much for all the hard work you do. And I'd really like to see more education of the county residents so that they could fully support the water district.
Thank you.
We have no additional speakers.
Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to the water supply
Thank you,
update.
guys.
Good evening, members of the board. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. We have a brief water supply update this evening, and we'll just jump right into it. We'll hit the current water supply, take a look at our projections, and then we have a couple of slides, just a quick update on water supply assessment. Our precipitation season is done since pretty much April. We haven't had much rain. We had a little bit maybe in June, but not much to write home about. We're sitting at about 49 inches of rain this year. And as that relates to storage, we're in a, as Ben mentioned earlier, thanks to our record-breaking sort of Sonoma supplemental water that we've managed to bring in this year, our reservoir system, we're above average in terms of storage. So we're doing well in that regard. As we look out to our projections, and for folks who may not have seen this chart before, the black line just represents our historical reservoir levels, or total reservoir storage levels. And where the dotted lines start, these are projections. And you can see the projections are all kind of collapsed into one line, essentially this green dash here, which is just our summertime usage. So we're going to see, I'm not expecting to see any precipitation meaningful precipitation between now and October 1st, the end of the water year. So end of the water year this year, we're projecting we're going to be right around 60,000 acre feet in 2022. And looking further out from there into 2023, you can see the three different colors, the green representing sort of average rainfall runoff, blue representing 50% of that, and the orange line 25% of that. So that would be just 13 inches of rain. And you know, for reference, last year we received 20 inches or so of rain. The year prior to that, 30 inches of rain. So the orange line is a very drastic water supply condition, and even under that condition, would be fairly close to the sort of 48,000 acre feet mark by the end of the next water year. So September of 2023, September 30th, 2023. So water supply conditions are good, and our customers are continuing to help out in terms of conservation. So just very briefly on, this is straight off of our website. This gets updated on a monthly basis. And this monthly savings tracker here relates to and compares us to the same month in 2020. When we do that, we see we're at about 25% down from 2020. It's actually, if we were to compare it to last year, it's pretty similar to last year in terms of water use. So right now we're at 22.4. I think last year maybe averaged about 22.5. So pretty much the same. And then as we look on the whole year, from July 21 all the way through June 2022, so our fiscal year, it looks like our customers have saved 25%. And the state target for savings was 15%. So customers have done a great job in helping us beat that state target. Of course, conservation to this extent anyway, and sort of in an unplanned budgetary way that we're faced with now, because our budgets were 2 years, right? So we did our budget back in 2020 planning wise. And so, right, there's a loss of revenue that goes with this. So the double-edged sword there. Looking at the strategic water supply assessment, last workshop with the board, we touched on the water management alternatives that we talked about, noting that we had shown the board the baseline scenarios. This is sort of if we don't do anything to enhance our existing water system and just ran through the 5 different scenarios, what those deficits would look like. And at the meeting, we just briefly described some of the costs and the nature of the projects that we're looking at, namely desalination and recycled water, the 2 different versions of that, or a couple different versions of each of these, actually, including local storage and Sonoma Marine partnerships, and then interties. Coming up in August timeframe, we'll be talking to you more about evaluation criteria, but it's good for us to be thinking about it in some terms and sort of just thinking about what the purpose of the evaluation criteria is. Namely that we're trying to develop a way of separating out the projects as we look at them. And so here, just for discussion purposes, just for, to get everyone thinking, are some example evaluation criteria. These are just some key ones that I think might resonate. Capacity, obviously the projects or the alternatives that we look at, we want to make sure that they're going to address the deficits that we're seeing. And of course, each one of these alternatives, depending on what they are, may have different water qualities. For example, DPR versus raising, a movable slide gate on a dam. The water quality that we collect at our local storage is treatable with our existing treatment systems and existing conveyance systems. There's really not much in terms of additional treatment that we would need. But if DPR was something that we were interested in exploring, clearly there, that source water would require a tremendous amount of treatment and monitoring. So maybe water quality is a good parameter for us to think about in terms of just separating, allowing us to separate the water management alternatives. And of course, the purpose of the whole project really is reliability. And in this case, it's the availability of that water under drought conditions is what's driving us. And then I won't go through the rest of these, but basically the third-party agreements, environmental issues, of which there may be many categories that we could come up with. We'll, I think, want to keep them to a reasonable number that, again, just allow us to really separate the projects. And of course, permitting and cost.
Paul,
So
can
as
I
we-
ask a quick
Yep.
question about that? Can you go back to the criteria there for a second?
Yes.
When you say these are criteria, generally, well, tell me what I think it would be interesting for the board and the public to hear what you mean by how you're thinking about using these. So for example, third-party agreements, they're not necessarily a negative. A lot of what water districts do and involves partnerships that are very constructive. So
right.
How do you,
so
what do you mean when you say that this is an evaluation criteria?
So just to stay with that particular example, third-party agreements, we talked, I think, at the last workshop about groundwater banking, for example. So there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to go into developing the rules and sort of regulations, if you like, with that group of participants, which will be basically all of the towns and cities in Sonoma and that currently use the groundwater up there. That's a pretty big lift in terms of time. So you would want to have an idea that maybe groundwater in this case, it's not necessarily a positive or a negative, but it might help set it in terms of a time frame for the project. And then there is the, in terms of water transfers, we had a pretty good peek into that as we were looking at the emergency intertie. And depending on the route of the transfer, you could have a number of agreements that would need to occur. If you think about wheeling the water through maybe even Santa Clara, right? So you have a whole host of maybe 5 or 6 different agencies that you would need to look at having agreements with, and you could certainly do that. It's just quite challenging. and maybe adds a little to the uncertainty for each of
Mhm.
those
Yeah.
options.
So you're kind of getting at what I thought. So most of the others of these are fairly they're qualitative, right? Capacity. We all know that what we need is you know what I mean? We need appropriate capacity. We need very high quality, water. We need, reliability, which I want to be careful. Reliability is not the same as certainty, but required third-party agreements, it's a neutral thing, right? It could be a good thing. It could be a hassle. So what you're really getting at here is the timing, right? So is the evaluation criteria whether there are third-party agreements, or is it what are the factors going to, having one or another option take more time or cost more money?
Yeah,
No, I'm just concerned about pulling this out because it's not necessary. It doesn't feel like the same as these others in terms of its qualitative, the qualitative issues.
Yeah, it's a fair point, right? You can negotiate really good agreements.
Right.
But at the same time, as we look at it, if you were evaluating an option for which you needed no agreements at all versus another option that required 6 agreements with 6 different agencies.
But I would, what I wouldn't care about is the agreement. What I would care about is the time. The time is the issue, right?
Yeah, I guess
the agreements mean. The agreements may bring you all kinds of positive things, right? That's not right. So, I mean,
they also may be undoable, depending, right? As you start doing.
Then the evaluation criteria is feasibility. I'm just saying it's not the agreement per se. I mean, the reason I'm concerned is because, for example, well, I don't want to take too much time on this, but
yeah,
it's the same issue as for permitting, right? Permit is a good thing to have permits that are addressing conditions that are important to avoid impacts that would otherwise be negative, right? So I just think we should be talking about evaluation criteria that's about the thing we're really talking about. So if it's time, if it's cost, if it's feasibility, let's evaluate those things because we want to compare these things on an apples to apples basis. The way you've got this set up now, it looks like third-party agreements and permits are bad things. And if projects are associated with them, that's a strike. And I'm just not sure that is a solid way to set up the evaluation criteria when what you really care about is money, cost, feasibility, whatever else is behind these things.
Yeah, I'm not looking at any of these things as pluses or minuses. They're just categories to help you determine pluses and minuses.
Well, but they're different, right? They are pluses and minuses. You're not, I mean, it matters if you have capacity that's reaching your goals. It matters if you have water quality that's meeting your requirements. It matters if you have reliability that are meeting your objectives, right? So
yeah,
all of those things.
So each of these are a tool to evaluate the difference between one project and another. Why don't we just put another category, add to the list that is feasibility, time.
Exactly. That is, we are in agreement.
Where does the project fit in terms of, is it a 10-year project or a 6-month project?
Exactly, because I think that's the issue, not whether or not third-party agreements are involved. So that's exactly my point. We should be evaluating how long something takes. We need that because timing could be different for different projects, right? A project may not have any third-party agreements, but it may still take, a boatload of time for some other reason.
Right.
It's fair points.
Anyway, I just think we should get our evaluation criteria all to be qualitatively on the same page.
No, it's good. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, not hearing any more takers. I'll move on. So we're continuing to work obviously on the project, and every couple of weeks we seem to be meeting and trying to move the issues along. And currently what the team's working on is the water management alternatives. We did present these and very initial and preliminary costs that everyone had a look at last time, and there were some surprises in there, and we're continuing to work through the costs and starting to get into the evaluation criteria. And I do appreciate the comments this evening. We're looking to, once we have those water management alternatives defined, we need to, insert them, integrate them into the decision support model so that we can see, before we really even evaluated them, we need to see, to answer that first question on capacity, are are those supplies available when we need them? And what effect do they have? And that's what the model is going to help us understand. Because there's not much point prioritizing a project that doesn't work for us, right, in terms of reducing the deficit. So we want to know those things. It's one of the key criteria for us, I think. And then, you know, notwithstanding just the management alternatives, but how we can use them and how we can, right, this structure for forecast-based decision-making, how we can take advantage of the water management alternatives maybe prior to a drought to boost the reservoir storage systems before we even get into the drought. And then, right, the last bullet here, refining the evaluation criteria, and we'll continue to come back to you and try to solicit comments, and we'll have a lot of time on the evaluation criteria because I know it's important. And then our schedule as we keep marching forward, June 28th was our sort of initial review of the management options. And in about a week's time, we'll be coming to you with a review of desalination and recycled water. And then we'll follow that up on the 19th with Intertie's local supply enhancement and Sonoma options. And as I said at the workshop, if we need more time on these to make sure everyone's comfortable and understands the nature and so on of these water management alternatives, we'll certainly do that. We're looking to have a public workshop on and continue to try to give the public access to the project team to ask questions and have their questions answered on July 28th from 5 to 7 p.m. And in August, there's a series of 3 meetings, sort of a similar pattern to June and to July, excuse me. We'll start talking about this evaluation process for the water management alternatives. Again, wrapping August up with another public workshop, just trying to keep the public moving along with us as we march forward on this project. So that concludes the water supply and sort of update on the assessment this evening. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Paul, are any of the staff reaching out to the state water resources control board sort of informally about augmenting local supply? Are there any sort of just, you know, inquiries being made or about where they are with climate change?
Not yet, Director Bragman. We have not broached the subject with anyone at the state yet. That's the short answer, but it's clearly on our agenda.
Yeah. That's a third party we need to negotiate with. That
critical,
an important one. So
yeah.
Okay. All right. Just checking. Thanks.
Yep. Sure.
Okay. Any other comments? How about public comment?
We do have one hand up, Mr. Sauter. Mr. Sauter?
Yes, as of today, I can go on the district's website and I can find that we have 80,000 acre feet of storage available. I can also find that we use 20,000 acre feet of water per year. My math says that we've got 4 years worth of storage. But I look at some of these charts and I see there's a 10% we can't get to. I've also heard the fact that we've only got 2.5 years worth of storage available. I don't think there's clarity on how much storage we actually have and how fast it's disappearing. If we've gone from 4 years of storage down to 2.5 years of storage, when are we going to hit 2 years of storage? I don't know how we look at storage and how we can really rely on it and how we know how much we have. That's point number one. Point number two is when I was looking at conservation, which is another thing that we have control over, I'm going to challenge anyone to go to the district's web page on water usage and tell me how many gallons per capita we're actually using and who's using it. As I look at the strategic water supply assessment, I see a baseline of 150 gallons per capita. How realistic is that? I can find you a half a dozen other numbers that say, here's how much per capita water we're using. Do we really know? I have a feeling that we think we've got information that we really can't rely on. Throughout its 100+ year history, this district has had sufficient rainfall and sufficient storage to take care of our needs internally. And the rainfall does seem to be pretty consistent over a long enough period of time, but I don't think we really understand how much storage we have. And I really don't think we understand how our consumers are using water. And therefore, if we don't understand how they're using water, I don't think we can educate them and direct them into a managed conservation that's going to give us reliability. So I'd like to end on that. And I'd like to say that we take a pause and really try to understand what we've got and see if we can nail down some of these wiggling numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker we have is Catherine H. Catherine?
Thank you. This is Catherine, and I live in Mill Valley and Tam Valley. And I just wanted to say that I really am impressed by the presentation on the fires, but on water supply. I remember being in Oakland when the bridge, Richmond Bridge flume was bringing water over to Marin, and then I moved over to Marin. I think we've had all that time in order to look at future possibilities, but we have had luck in having good water supply from the rain. I don't know if, and please forgive me because I haven't done my homework, I don't know if we have aquifers or not underneath Marin County, but in Southern California, what was going on is that they've already begun treating reclaimed water, which is not your district, but other districts, to tertiary level. And they pump it back down into the ground or into a storage area. And for the possibility of another part of clean water. I don't know if we have looked at, worked together with our sanitary districts or what that would cost. Also, I just wanted to say that back in that time, which was more than 30 years ago, I was on a Metropolitan Water District study, and I know the expense of using the membranes that you have to do for reverse osmosis for desalinizing water. Surely by now, there must be a membrane that takes less energy to pump. Have we really looked at all of those different membranes that may be available? I'm just asking all of these questions because I want to help. I don't want to be critical. Would it be possible for me to talk to one of the staff people about what I know from the previous studies? I would really welcome the opportunity to be of service. Thank you.
Can I ask staff if they can make a point of reaching out to Catherine, because I would love to have her involved in this.
Yes, we'll go ahead and make an initial contact. Sure.
Great, thank you.
I also wanted to, and this is not the right time to get back to get to a back and forth, but we'll also have staff contact Mr. Sauter and help assure him that we do know how much water we have and we do know where it goes. We may not know how everyone wants to slice and dice it in that way. And the big gap in the comment, but there's a lot more information to share that I think he'd benefit from a conversation that we'll have with him is there's a demand number. And if you just look at the demand from our customers and our storage, you come up with another number versus that's the customer demand. We also have sizable environmental releases, of course. We have evaporation and we have natural losses in the system that collectively give us the 2+ years or so. But the right time to do it, I do think, is to engage Mr. Sauter that is very interested in looking the numbers, and I'll follow up with that as well.
That'd be great. Thanks, Ben.
We have no additional comments.
Okay, thank you all. Number 8, resolution authorizing general manager to issue a temporary limited use permit for service from a hydrant to the Marin County Agricultural Commission.
Yes, good evening. This is me again. So the Marin County Agricultural Commission reached out to explain that the Dulcini Jersey Dairy had a problem, sort of a critical failure with their pond wall or dam. I think there's a large crack in it, is my understanding, and they lost pretty much the entire contents of the pond, and they are in desperate need of water for their animals. And so the county ag commissioner reached out, sort of the similar thing that we did last year for a number of ranchers. In this case, it's just one rancher or dairy that needs our assistance this time. It's expected to be a fairly small volume of water in total, even if it were to continue through December. I think it's just a few acre feet of water at most, maybe 2 or 3. Certainly less than 5 acre feet in total. You know, because it's outside of our service area, we're coming to the board asking you for your authorization in the form of that resolution this evening. And we'll continue to monitor their use of the water and, you know, make sure that they're doing something to repair their facility so this doesn't become kind of an ongoing process. So with that, I'll stop talking about it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we're seeking the board's authorization.
Move approval.
Second. And just for the public, I mean, Dulcini is going to be purchasing the water.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not just a gift. And I think it's good for us to monitor their progress repairing their pond. So isn't that an adjoining ranch to Nicasio, or was at one point?
Yeah,
yeah,
I believe you're correct. And there's some thought that maybe the water ran into Nicasio. So
I think they may have given up. I think they may have given up some of their land for Nicasio back then when it was first designed. So, yeah.
Part of a community, this is a good thing.
Yeah, it's mutual aid. So.
And be advised that the cost of the water is the small part. The trucking is going to be 5 times the cost of the water or more. So they're investing a fair amount of money to do this. Okay, any public comment?
We have no public comments at this time.
Okay, then we have a motion and a second. We need a roll call.
Thank you. Director Kohler?
Aye.
Director Schmidt?
Aye.
Director Bragman?
Aye.
Director Gibson?
Aye.
And President Russell?
Aye. Okay, you're still up, Cerise. Now you've got the future meetings.
Okay, so for future meetings tomorrow, we have a special meeting for the watershed site visit #1, the watershed recreation management plan. And the next meeting after that will be Tuesday, July 12th. It is a special meeting for the strategic water supply assessment working session. Then we have Friday, July 15th, and that's going to be our operations committee at 9:30 a.m. And Tuesday, July 19th, our board of directors regular bi-monthly meeting. We have a closed session starting at 6 p.m. and the regular session will begin at 7:30.
Where is the meeting on the 6th?
That is on the watershed.
I know where.
It will.
How do people get there?
So they can go on to Sky Oaks.
Okay, that's where it's going to start.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
Great.
it's going to start in the Lake Lagunitas parking lot.
Okay, that's the question we needed.
Thank you, Adrian.
Just so everybody knows. Thank you. Okay, with that.
What time, Charisse? What time?
At 5
2 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
2 to 3:30 it says, right?
5 o'clock it says.
Okay, because it seems to me it says 2 to 3:30 someplace else.
Tomorrow's visit, it's at 2 and it's a 90-minute tour.
Beginning at 2?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, cool. With that, we're going to adjourn the meeting and go into closed session.
Thank you. And for all the members of the public, if you can just go ahead and exit out. We don't want to kick you out because otherwise we won't be able to go back in for a public comment after the reporting. I'm just going to make sure that Vicky is included here. So just give me 1 second.
Yeah, she's on.
We have 3 attendees still to exit, and we can pause the recording anytime.
Yes, sir.
Now there's 2.
Or 2. We're down to 2.
Mr. Krajewski and Mr. Vestal.
Okay, Krajewski's gone.
Okay.
Go ahead and Newcomb, Sharice.
Oh, okay. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead.
The closed session was adjourned at 10:04 and there was no reportable action.
And I think with that, we can adjourn.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
everybody. Okay.
Good night.
Bye.